Hello, and you're listening to Eco-Justice Radio. We present environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Eco-Justice Radio acknowledges that we are recording this show on the traditional territory of the ASICAMPE people in Southern California. Welcome. I am Jack Eidt. On today's show, Ancient Roots of Cacao, the Montegrande archaeological site in Peru. I will be interviewing Karen Gordon, associate from ASICAMPE, the nonprofit Association for Scientific Research of the Peruvian Amazon. Karen Gordon is equal parts soul-filled and inspired educator. Her work as a restoration ecologist and land steward has spanned California's Channel Islands to the Peruvian Amazon for the last 30 years. She has called Costa Rica cloud-forested mountaintops home for the last 2 decades. ASICAMPE is a small Peruvian nonprofit research organization led by Dr. Quirino Olivera, making significant contributions to Amazonian and world history. Nevertheless, the Huaca Montegrande project, destined to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site, faces multiple threats and requires protection to continue their work. As well, we have musical interludes in this episode by Oscar Jimenez Fernandez. The Montegrande archaeological site, nestled in the high heart of the Peruvian Amazon, is revealing groundbreaking insights into ancient civilizations and the inextricable relationship between humans and the natural world. Among Montegrande's most significant recent discoveries are traces of cacao, the plant responsible for the world's chocolate, inside 6,000-year-old ceremonial pottery vessels from what is now recognized as the oldest monumental temple site in Peru, predating the pyramids of Egypt, Mesopotamia. Nominated as one of the top 10 archaeological discoveries in the world, the Montegrande is currently unearthing the story of the ancient Amazonian Marañón culture and their sophisticated agroforestry practices, social structure, and cosmovision 3,000 years before the more well-studied Inca and Nazca cultures. These findings completely rewrite the history of organized human settlement and spirituality in the ancient Amazon. Groundbreaking evidence from Montegrande points to the Marañón culture as being the earliest human stewards of cacao in the world, tending its domestication, cultivation, veneration, and trade. Thank you for tuning in to Eco-Justice Radio. I'm your host, Jack Eidt, and it is my honor to welcome our guest, Karen Gordon, Associate ASICAMPE, the nonprofit association for scientific research of the Peruvian Amazon. Welcome to Eco-Justice Radio.
Thank you, Jack.
So tell us about, you've got a lot of work going on down in Peru. So we want to know about this archaeological site, Montegrande, and its connections to the origin of, well, indigenous life in South America, but also cacao. So tell us about the region and the native people of your work in Peru.
For sure. It's such an honor for me to be here. Thank you so much for this invitation to be able to share a little bit more with the world about this corner of the world where cacao has originated. And this story begins probably 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. We are located, this project, in the Marañón River Valley, which is sort of near the border between Ecuador and Peru. And so we are considered high Amazon rainforest. So rainforest has many different levels. And so we are at about 700 meters above sea level. And we are near the Marañón River. The Marañón River is one of the main rivers that are the headwaters of the world famous Amazon River. So that's where we are located. And I am an associate for the not-for-profit organization called ASICAMPE, which in English means the Association for the Scientific Research and Investigation of the Peruvian Amazon. So we are a group that is currently working on an extraordinary project. It's a project that has my heart, and it's truly a groundbreaking, like literally a groundbreaking project, because world history is literally being rewritten as we continue our weeks of work. So many people know Montegrande as an archaeological site, but for us, it's so much more than an archaeological site. It is a living temple space that we know has at least 6,000 years of history inside of it, but we are not quite finished with the excavation. We still probably have another 4 years to go, but we are at about the 6,000 year level right now. And the history of this, of the finding of this site, of this temple, was actually fascinating, in that it's located in the town of Jaén, which is actually more like a small city. And in the center of the town, which has these glorious views of mountains all around, and a river in the distance, and a burgeoning community sort of below it, there's this mound. And this mound was covered with garbage. And this mound was once the town's garbage dump. And what happened is that there were some people in town who had found some artifacts, and word got out to an archaeologist who had been studying the archaeology and the history of the Peruvian Amazon. And he was really interested in coming. And so they were able to get a grant from the municipality of Jaén, which is the town, just to clear the trash, just to take the trash off and to take the trash away. And something absolutely extraordinary happened, because Dr. Oliveira, Quirino Oliveira, who's actually the director of our organization, he decided to employ a type of archaeological technique. Rather than digging in deep trenches, like quadrats of deep trenches, he decided to do a light excavation across a wide area. And one of the things that appeared when he did that was the image made out of stone of a spirit that was covering, very evidently, the top of a pyramid. And it sort of blew the minds of the archaeological community and the people, the anthropologists, and again, the archaeologists who've been studying history in the Peruvian Amazon, because it's always been assumed that the cultures of the Amazon were hunter-gatherers, that they were very simple, and that they didn't really have much of a social structure, that they did not participate in agriculture or, fine pottery creation or anything like that. And one of the things that was found here I would say, in the Amazon, is that that wasn't true. About 100 years ago, there was an archaeologist and an anthropologist as well from Peru who posited that the Andean cultures, the cultures that are so much more studied, actually came from the Amazon, but nobody wanted to pay attention to them. They were like, that's not true. But in fact, one of the things that Montegrande has brought to the surface, there are many things that Montegrande has brought to the surface. One of the things that is rewriting history in the Amazon and in Peru is that there was the existence of a culture called the Marañón culture that existed 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, and that they were the predecessors of the Andean cultures, and that this particular culture created monumental architecture, which of course we're so used to seeing in places like Machu Picchu. But that this temple space was built 3,000 years, it's contemporary and older than the temples in Egypt and the temples from Mesopotamia. And so this is the only archaeological project that is happening in the entire Amazon. There are no other mounds. There's nothing else that's been uncovered to date. And the other piece of information, in addition to uncovering just the existence of a whole new culture that lived in the Marañón River Valley, we have also uncovered that this was a very organized society. A society that was so organized that they participated in agriculture, that they participated in spirituality and religious practices, that they participated in fine pottery creation and fine jewelry making, and that they were organized enough, and had vision enough and had a cosmology already created to enact the event for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of erecting a monument that lines up with the stars, that lines up with the equinoxes and the solstices. And the other thing that has been absolutely uncovered, which is groundbreaking, is the evidence of cacao, this being the birthplace of domesticated cacao. There is wild cacao that's been living in the Amazon for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's called macombo, at least there in Peru. But what Montegrande is showcasing, it's showing us that this temple site had a culture that created deep relationship with nature and participated in the domestication of one of the plants that is one of the most widespread food items in the world. If we all think about cacao, we can translate that to thinking about chocolate. And chocolate is so abundant in our lives in any supermarket that we go to. It's part of all of our celebrations. It's part sometimes of our grieving. It's a part of our gifting practice. And yet Montegrande is literally home base in the entire world of where the original cacao, domesticated cacao, came from. And so for many years, people assumed and thought that the cacao came from the Olmec cultures, or because in thinking about the Aztecs and other cultures in Central America or in Mexico, they thought that, well, that's where cacao came from. And yes, there's much and many layers of cacao cosmology that's out there, but the actual plant, the actual beverage, we now know came from the deep Amazon where we are. And the reason that we know that is because on the carbon-14 dates on the inside of the ceremonial vessels that we have found is cacao beverage. That's at least 5,300 years old. And now we are finding other artifacts ever since, because we did publish a paper in Science News in May 2024. It's an academic journal, and there were 24 authors on this article. We are now many months past that investigation, and we continue to find vessels, and we continue to find pottery that's much older than that has vestiges of cacao inside of it. So for us, Montegrande has just sort of opened history and has opened stories to the world that have never been heard and seen. And yet there's something even more extraordinary for me about this project, which is where I come in. Because I am a restoration ecologist. I've been working in ecological restoration and education and land stewardship for the last 30 years between the Channel Islands of California and Costa Rica, and also the Peruvian Amazon. And one of the most fascinating and really heartwarming pieces of this story is that even though this temple is absolutely ancient, in a way, it's still alive. Because the cacao trees that live in these areas, this area near Montegrande, on some farms and also on some indigenous lands, have cacao that has the same exact genetic profile as the cacao that's found in the temple. And so Jaén, in this particular area of Peru, just as in many Amazonian areas of Peru, we're great cacao growers, but many of the varieties of cacao are considered cacao mejorado, which is essentially formulated cacao. And what we have in that particular area of Peru are pieces of land that still have what we call cacao, or what they call cacao único, which is original cacao. And so for us, the Montegrande project is not just an excavation project. It's not just about archaeology, but it's about the living history of a people. It's a living history of a plant. It's a living history of a relationship between people and plants. And for me, it's also about environmental justice. And it's about social justice as well, as we also, we can talk a little bit about forward the Abahun people who live, in that area, who the Marañón culture were their very deep, deep, deep ancestors. And yet the Abahun people are the ones who are living in that area now, and who are also the stewards of these lands, which, are in great risk of development as well. So that's the basics about our project. And it's an absolute joy for me to be able to speak to a wider audience about this.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty amazing work that you're doing. You coming from ecological restoration background, how did you sort of get into this? Because this is more on the archaeological side, but of course it deals with the ecosystems and what's going on as well. So how did you come into this project?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's like I smile when I think about it, because I sometimes ask myself, how did I come into this project?
Yeah.
I think that happens to a lot of us when we find ourselves in an extraordinary moment in time. And to answer that question, I can back up a little bit first and just share that my passion truly has been restoring landscapes. And as we restore landscapes, one of the things that we're also doing is we are restoring conversations that have been had for thousands of years. So not only do I work in ecological restoration, but also in conservation work. So I work in one or two other pretty significant pieces of conservation work in Peru, in the Peruvian Amazon. And for me, I've always thought one of the things that I love about my work is that I get to help maintain the conversations that the landscape has had for thousands of years. And many times people, when they think about protecting and preserving the Amazon or the Peruvian Amazon, they think about the trees and the birds and the monkeys and the jaguars, and all of that is true. And of course, that is really what brought me to my work. And yet when I encountered Montegrande, it was only earlier this year, I realized that protecting the Amazon and conserving the Amazon also includes protecting and conserving the conversations that have been had by the original humans who were part of the landscape for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So it's a real joy, and it's a real deep honor that I have to bring myself as a restoration ecologist who has mostly focused my whole life on trees and soils and plants, to the conversation of the ancients, listening to the conversation of the ancient people who were once a part of this land and who were once a part of a great cosmology that had to do with deep relationship between earth and sky and plants. And so I came to this project really specifically because I was in the northwest part of Peru working in, one of the things that I love is Quechua, studying the Quechua language. I also play the charango, which is an Andean string instrument. And I was there studying a bit of indigenous culture. I was there studying Quechua with a Quechua teacher. I was there studying songs, and I was studying music. So I had brought myself there originally, not to look for a research project, but this project actually found me. And when I was in the area, as past comes to pass, I was connected with the director of the program, and we knew that this was also a project for me to be working with and working on. So it was destiny in a way for me to be here, to be working with Montegrande. And it feels incredible to me too, to kind of round out, in my 30 years of working with the restoration of ecosystems, it feels really good for me to also begin. I mean, it's always included the human component, right? But because it has to, landscapes don't just exist without humans. Humans are part of nature. Yes. But to truly be face to face inside of a temple that was created by humans thousands of years ago, to venerate their relationship with nature, and to study the stars and to study the plants and to do deep explorations around a particular plant, which in this case is cacao, which of course there's a cacao boom all over the place. There's people doing cacao ceremonies left and right and all of these things. But to actually see where cacao, the birthplace of cacao, and one of the things that perhaps we can share in the notes for the call are, we'll share some links. And one of the things that we will be able to see is one of the things that the ancient people put on the top of this temple was a spirit made out of stone, a massive, with a circular spiral center. Mm-hmm. And for me, that spiral really represents the movement of where we are in the present, kind of down into the past. We kind of think about that in terms of archaeology, but archaeology is also thinking about now. From the center of the spiral, where we believe that the highest level spiritual leader of this particular group was buried, that also has a message out, spirals back out to this future, which is now. And we have cacao trees that need protection, need stewardship. We have agroforestry systems that need protection and that need stewardship because they are holding some of the deepest, oldest genetic keys to Amazonian history right inside of them. And so that's kind of where I come into the picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to interrupt you for just a second. We need to take a break. So we'll come back after the break and continue this conversation. You're listening to Eco Justice Radio, a public supported media outlet. Please consider making a donation to ensure that we can continue to provide socially and environmentally driven content. Donations can be made at ecojusticeradio.org and socal350.org. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/ecojusticeradio. Today you're listening to Ancient Roots of Cacao, the Montegrande archaeological site in Peru. I am your host, Jack Eidt, and our guest is Karen Gordon, associate from ASICAMPE, the nonprofit association for scientific research of the Peruvian Amazon. Okay, so I'm here with Karen Gordon and talking about a whole amazing connections, this discovery of this site, Montegrande, which was basically a mound along a river. Did the native people who lived there, did they have a sense that this was an important, because a lot of times people from the outside say, hey, we discovered this, but you really find that the native people sort of knew a lot that they're sort of discovering. Is that a situation here? What was their role in what's going on with this site?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Jack. So the Awahun people are the current indigenous group that lives in the Marañón River Valley and in the more northwest part of Peru, near the Ecuador border. And it is in the Marañón Valley. Well, the Marañón River, like I mentioned before, is part of the headwaters of the Amazon. And I was speaking with Don Quirino recently, and I asked him, did the Awahun people know, or did they have any stories connecting to some of these mound temple sites that have recently been found in the past few years? And he said no, that they didn't know about that. And so it was a great joy for some of their elders to come and to see this, because the Marañón people, we can remember that the Marañón culture is they are the deep ancestors, let's just say, of the Awahun people, but also they are also the deep ancestors of many other groups as well in different parts of that part of the Amazon. So as far as we know, there aren't any stories, but that is still a question that we are ready and very interested in answering. So ASICAMPE, as a not-for-profit organization, we are not only interested in archaeological excavation, that's not it only, because we are the Association for Scientific Research in the Peruvian Amazon. So we are really interested in learning more and working with our anthropologists. We have some anthropologists that we work with as well to learn a little bit more about this. One of the things that we definitely know is that all of the indigenous groups that are in that part of the Amazon work with cacao in all different ways. And perhaps some of the ways that they work with cacao stem from the way that their deep ancestors of the Marañón culture worked. We don't really know that yet. But one of the things that we are really devoted to doing is when excavations are complete, and that might be in about 4 years, and we might be able to do this earlier. I think it depends on timeline about certain things, but we dream about being able to invite the Awahun elders and their best builders to the Montegrande site to erect a magnificent maloca, which is a spiritual house of prayer and stories and sharing next to the Montegrande temple site, because we do recognize that this is part of their heritage all the way back through time. And so we also are partnering and making alliances with the Awahun people as well, because we do know that they are sitting upon lands that, again, are very, I would say it's a very sensitive area right now in terms of development, et cetera. But these are lands where, again, the native original cacao lives. And so, we're learning more about their cosmology around cacao. So there's so much still to learn there in the northwest part of the country.
Yeah, one of the important ways of preempting development in mining, there's a lot of different mining going on in these areas, as well as deforestation, connecting roads, cattle ranching, these type of things, is to have a functioning cacao economy. Is that at all happening? You said there's a history and a connection, and I've seen in many parts of Peru that there's quite a lot of that economy growing. Is there some of that in this specific region that's going on?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So there's definitely a cacao economy that's happening in and around the major town, small city of Jaén. And there are multiple varieties of cacao that are being grown, just like they are here in Costa Rica as well, everywhere. And so there are not, as far as I know of, there are no, I would say, like farm to bean to bar chocolate makers, for example. In Jaén, I believe that most of their cacao just gets sold, on the massive scale to the industry, which gets sold to places like Nestle or who knows who else, right? Like, let's just call it big cacao business. But in terms of cacao being cultivated, let's say the original cacao being reproduced and cultivated and cared for in that way to perhaps be sort of like an original Peru's original chocolate, there is nothing like that that's happening right now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the Awahun, that particular area of the country, there is cacao that's being grown, but one of the things we have to just remember is that many of the groups, the indigenous groups of Peru are highly marginalized. And while they may be growing quite a bit of cacao in the area that might be an hour to 2 hours from Jaén, closest to us, their ability to get their cacao out of there, for example, is also not very easy, just because of the economic situation. So one of the things that ASICAMPE is doing is we are studying the possibilities of partnership as a non-for-profit organization that really cares about deep relationship and right relationship making and building. We are beginning to study that. And I think it's one of the things I'd like to also highlight here on this program is that, so one of the reasons I feel so honored in being able to present here today, Jack, is that I am the only native English speaker and the only North American that's an associate of this project. Everyone else is Peruvian. And so it's a real honor for me. And there are Peruvian archaeologists and anthropologists and agroforesters, et cetera. And yet I get to have the pleasure to be the one to represent my colleagues and the relationships and initiatives that we're all working on here.
Yeah, and I think you represent it quite well. One thing that those of us who are not in the archaeological field, for me, I'm trying to figure out and I've been to a lot of archaeological sites, the Maya sites, Aztec sites, a lot of things in Mesoamerica. Mm-hmm. And how do you understand? So you find, from what I can see, they found pottery and some evidence of this cacao and maybe a drink from it. How do you make the connection to the spiritual, the cosmovision, as well as the agroforestry and the cultural side? How do you develop that out from the rocks and the remains of a site like that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love this question because that's a question that I've needed to ask myself as I've come into the project, right? Again, many people, when they think about archaeological sites, they think about places like they think about rocks and dirt and soil. They might even think about like little paintbrushes that archaeologists use and perhaps little magnifying glasses, etc. And so one of the things that we need to remember that I've come to learn very deeply about being at this particular site is that this is not just archaeology. This is a temple. It is a space that was crafted by hand, stone by stone. One of the things that we find is that there are stones from rivers that are far from the Montegrande site. And there are stones from the high Andes that were brought to build this site. And what's even more fascinating is that one of the patterns that we see is we see a round river stone placed right next to sort of a rocky, more angular Andes stone. So it's round river and then a high mountain Andes stone. And we see that throughout the entire pyramid. And one of the things that the archaeologists speak about is how there's that beautiful balance between sort of that masculine and feminine energy, the movement of the waters and the movement of the mountains. And so one of the things, if we're able to do, is we're able to connect that with every single stone and every piece of like mortar and plaster that we're able to see there, those were touched by human hands. Those were touched by human hands that also had a prayer to elevate life in a way. And so we are able, I mean, it's fascinating that the deeper that we go, the more that the temple actually is showing us what wants to be uncovered. And we have found in different areas of the temple, we have found very specific areas that were purposely created for making offerings. So in those offering places, so that there's a tie-in to spirituality, we find everything from ancient seeds, we're finding jawbones of mammals, we're finding hides, we're finding really old basketry, and obviously lots and lots and lots of pottery. And so for me, a temple space is very alive, just like when we go into something like La Sagrada Familia or any of the modern temples that modern humans have erected. We go into these spaces and we actually feel reverence and we feel life, we feel awe. And that is really what we feel in the Montegrande temple space as well. And so for me, how that's connected to spirituality and also to cacao is that, we're still learning so much about this, Jack, that that we are learning how the people from the Marañón culture created a relationship with a plant that they imbibed, that opened perhaps their heart, perhaps it opened their perception, perhaps it opened a connection with the natural and the divine world, that created celebration, that created a moment of prayer as well, and veneration of life itself. And so this directly connects to where we are right now, because think about, again, all of the people who are still throughout the world, especially throughout the Americas, cacao as spirit and cacao as deep nourishment, because it is a superfood, and cacao as a way of life, cacao as a very high level plant of deep relationship that most indigenous groups, including here in Costa Rica, have. And so I don't know if that answered your question, or if there's something else that you'd like me to expound upon.
I saw that the Maya had the drink of cacao that they had was mixed with maize, with corn, and they didn't have what we consider our hot chocolate of today, and of course those of us who do dark chocolate, it's very bitter. Was there a sense in the remains of that, of what kind of drink they had, or mixing with it, or was it just sort of how I don't really understand these remains and how they can get all this information. So if that's a simple question,
it's very complex, because they take the scrapings, just imagine, that they literally do tiny little scrapings of the inside of the pottery and then send them out to labs. And so what the beverage that I understand was found was mostly cacao, like ground cacao, perhaps with water. Some of the other remains, let's say vegetable remains, that have been found in different containers as well, have included corn, obviously domesticated corn, also yucca as well. So this is a wonderful question for me to pose to Don Quirino, that if any of the reports that have come back include, let's say, the ancient cacao, ceremonial cacao recipe. I think that's what you're asking. And so I will definitely move that question forward. I'm going to be in Montegrande this time next week. And so I will definitely inquire about that and follow up with you.
Right. Well, I think it's pretty fascinating process here of unveiling what we can learn from history through what's the remains of a culture there, and this being like a trash dump, or at least a trash dump on top of it, is really like, how far away from the city is it?
It's right there. It's almost like literally in the center of the city.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. But when we think about a city, this is like a small, higher Amazon city. This is not a city that's filled with skyscrapers or anything
Sure.
like that. I mean, obviously, there's thousands and thousands of people, but when you go to the Montegrande site, by the way, which I'd like to offer up, is not open to the public, only through like invitation, or with one of the archaeologists, or with one of the anthropologists, or with somebody like me, for example, or any one of our team can we visit. It's not yet a public site, because we are still in the excavation phase, but for people who are academics, or for people who are really interested in learning about it and supporting cacao, we can offer ways to visit. But it's amazing to be on the site, Jack, because when you stand there, you can almost open your eyes and then close your eyes and understand why that temple space was built right there. Because it's literally in the center of the space, of this beautiful valley that is surrounded by mountains. There used to be an old lake that is no longer really there anymore, but archaeology has shown that there was once an ancient old lake nearby, and then the Marañón River is not exactly right next door, but it's across the valley, and it's over there. So it makes a lot of sense that this mound was created in the center of a valley with a vast expanse of sky, with the Apus, with the beautiful mountain peaks all around, with the water element also all around, and of course the breezes. And I also I like to try to imagine, what from the top of that temple site or anywhere from that temple site, to imagine the Amazon forest back then. But people, once again, we often think about the Amazon as just this wild place. And we are coming to learn and see that it wasn't just all wild, that humans and their environment have been interacting for thousands of years, and that humans have sculpted landscapes. And some of the tree species, ancient people also deforested. Ancient people also took down trees, but they were creating what we call agroforestry systems, places where there were edible foods to eat, and fruits and vegetables and corn. Imagine the amount of corn. Imagine the amount of space that it would need to be able to support a whole culture. We have to have corn crops and yucca, etc. So I was just imagining the last time I was there in July, just the massive, beautiful, ancient agricultural lands that were all around the temple, of course, which included the cacao. And cacao is a forest tree, biologically speaking. Any of us who study cacao and the actual tree species of cacao know that it's an understory tree in a tropical forest. So we know that there was tropical forest all around. And it thrills me to no end to think that some of the lands that are still existing in Jaén are related to the lands that were cultivated by the Marañón culture 8,000 years ago.
Yeah. Well, right. We're going to take a quick break and come back. So stay tuned. You're listening to Eco Justice Radio, a public-supported media outlet. Please consider making a donation to ensure that we can continue to provide socially and environmentally driven content. Donations can be made at ecojusticeradio.org and SoCal350.org. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/ecojusticeradio. Today you're listening to Ancient Roots of Cacao, the Montegrande archaeological site in Peru. I am your host, Jack Eidt, and our guest is Karen Gordon, associate from ASICAMPE, the nonprofit association for scientific research of the Peruvian Amazon. This is an excerpt from Ancient Builders of the Amazon from Nova PBS, featuring Dr. Quirino Oliveira.
It is one of the most extraordinary and baffling archaeological finds of recent years.
Ese detalle de sacar capa por capa nos llevaron a identificar.
As we cleared away the top layers of soil, we began to see stones in a circular arrangement.
Una especie de terrazas o
Then platforms and terraces began to appear.
Y es ahí que nosotros
that really surprised us. It seemed extraordinary.
As the full structure emerged, their surprise grew. Here was a massive pyramid, as tall as a 5-story building, constructed from clay, stone, and reed, with a mysterious stone spiral built on its summit. The carbon-14 dates were even more astonishing. The pyramid was built over 5,000 years ago, even before the pyramids of Egypt and Mesopotamia, a time when archaeologists had believed the Amazon was populated only by hunter-gatherers. Montegrande rewrites the history of complex societies on the continent. For over a century, when archaeologists wrote about cities and high civilization in South America, they focused on cultures like the Inca of the Andes or the Nazca of the Pacific coast. But here at Montegrande is clear evidence of a complex society and monumental architecture at least 3,000 years older than either the Inca or Nazca.
If you compare the evidence for early architecture, of monumental architecture, of plant domestication, we see a lot of things happening before here in this part of Peru, in the Amazon, not in the coast and not even the mountains. So I think it really highlights the importance that the place that Amazonian indigenous people had in the deep cultural history of this part of South America.
The excavation of an almost identical but much smaller spiral pyramid in Ecuador revealed a tomb. This makes Quirino think that Montegrande also is the tomb of a religious leader. If he's right, it would give meaning to the mysterious spiral so carefully constructed on top of it.
The spiral is one of the most ancient symbols in the history of humanity. It signifies the beginning and the end of life, the endless creation of one generation from the preceding one.
Yo estoy sentado en el centro de la arquitectura en forma de espiral.
I am sitting at the center of the spiral architecture, and right beneath me, in the spiral center, would be the tomb of that high-status individual.
Suponemos que está
We believe that he is seated in a fetal position,
y del centro de la cabeza
and from the center of his head, the spiral expands out like the axis mundi, the axis of the cosmos.
y eso además tiene un concepto astronómico, probablemente con
This also probably had important astronomical associations, as in most ancient societies who studied the night sky, the stars, and linked them to life on Earth.
Okay, so in the last segment, you mentioned the Apus. We're talking about mountains, right? That's the spirit of the mountains. Could you explain real quick what that means?
Yeah, so the Apus Apu is a Quechua word, which means wise one, but the Apus are also often referred to, like often the mountain spirits and the mountain peaks are called the Apus. They're like the grandmothers and the grandfathers, the wise ones.
And so you're originally stated that through this project has shown that the origination of the Incan culture potentially comes from this region. How does that understood through this process?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that probably is going to be a much better question that's answered by an anthropologist, because
Sure. Understood.
It's not just about the Incans, it's about just Andean culture in general. And we need to remember that the Incas were much after many of the early Andes cultures as well. And so one of the things that was thought about was that, it was many of these massive cosmovisions that we learn about and that we study about, they thought only existed in the Andes, but in fact, we now see that these earliest people were down there in the Amazon and did have cosmology that very likely influenced, the continued upward movement of the people into the Andes. And so I don't have the map of that. We have the map of Cacao through our scientific research paper, but I don't necessarily have the map. There might be somebody else who has the map of the movement of the people from the Amazon on up. I think this is still so groundbreaking that there are people who are studying this.
Yeah, well, it's pretty amazing stuff, and an issue that not many people know much about here. And obviously, chocolate is an everyday thing for a lot of people, and there's a lot of questions about where our chocolate comes from and how healthy some of it is. But I think it's really important to understand its origination of the plant and the connection to the plant. And there is a trend going on of cacao ceremonies and things like that. And, it's good to understand that history. So I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing with us about this.
Thank you so much, Jack. And as we are able to continue our excavations and our archaeological and anthropological studies as well, happy to share more. Keep your eyes and ears opened for Montegrande. We have been named as one of the top 10 archaeological finds in the world because of this groundbreaking history that we've been finding, again, about the Marañón culture, about the origins of cacao, the origins of the early spirituality in the Amazon, and the influence that it had in the subsequent Andean communities and cultures. And so we are just really starting to go out there to reach into the world that's not just the scientific world of academic research papers, but we're really starting to move our message out there so that people can learn more about us and continue their studies about their cacao and their relationships with cacao and early peoples as well. So
there's one aspect, some dangers that the project is facing. You've had some funding challenges. I mean, it's always funding challenges are in every undertaking on this earth, frankly. But what's going on? What sort of difficulties is this archaeological dig and project and investigation? What sort of challenges are you all facing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate you asking that, Jack. Montegrande on one hand is, like I've mentioned a few times, it's rewriting world history in so many different ways. And ASICAMPE, which is our small not-for-profit organization, is a group of really dedicated, heartfelt scientists who never ever thought that what they would be uncovering would probably be it's going to be in line for an UNESCO World Heritage Site if we're able to get there. And that's the big if, because we are a very small not-for-profit organization. And the Peruvian government, even though, Peru is full of culture, there's almost no support whatsoever for projects such as this. And I'd like to remind us that the project is not just about an archaeological dig, but it's also about the alliances with the land and the people, the landowners, and the original, ancient landowners of forests that contain the original cacao. And so one of the things that's happening is that we are very close to running out of funding. We thought that the Peruvian Ecuador binational project was going to continue to fund us, and we were actually given the handshake on that in July, but the director of that program was just handpicked by the Peruvian president to be the current Minister of the Exterior. And so that project is completely at a halt. And because that's at a halt, all of our funding is at a halt. And this is where the danger comes in, and where, for me, it's just imperative. This is one of the reasons we're getting the word out about Montegrande, is that per Peruvian law, if an archaeological excavation that has permission from the Ministry of Culture to exist, so that's us, ASICAMPE has permission, and we have, let's say, a supervisor, a distant supervisor, but still a supervisor of the project, that's part of the Ministry of Culture. If any archaeological project is stopped midway because of lack of funding, because this is considered patrimony of the country of Peru, and we are unable to move forward, the entire site needs to be reburied.
That is crazy.
Stone by stone. And it's not just like we don't just shovel stuff on there. Like, it's stone by stone, has to be put back stone by stone. Like, it is.
So you couldn't just put sort of a tarp over it and
No. It has a tarp over it. Like, we do have like a bamboo tarp thing because we are working. It's one of the ways that we're able to work under the rain and under sun, because as we get deeper into the temple space, it just becomes more and more sensitive. No, we can't just cover it with a tarp. We have to cover it with dirt. We have to cover it with the earth that we've taken out. And so honestly, Jack, like, we are not interested in having that happen. We really do need the support. And so we're very fortunate to have a fiscal sponsor in the United States, the Abundant Earth Foundation. We've partnered with them, so people are able to make 501c3 donations, and we're very happy to put that link or provide you with that link so that we can keep our project moving forward. Because this isn't like, we just need a couple of dollars to move this forward. No, like, the need is now, in order for us to keep on uncovering truly the mysteries of the past, which are informing our present and our future. This is one of the ways, like, if there are people who are interested, like I said, in protecting and conserving the Peruvian Amazon, this is one of the ways to be able to do that as well. And for anybody who has a deep relationship or deep love with cacao, and cacao, environmental justice and social justice that has to do with cacao and the deep history and having a right relationship with their use of chocolate and cacao, this is another beautiful project in which to support. And so thank you for asking that question. And it's unthinkable for us that this project is about literally in about 2 weeks to come to a standstill, unless we get some international support through our 501c3 partner fiscal sponsor organization.
Well, we wish you the best of luck with that. And my optimistic sense tells me that you're going to pull it together, but that's pretty down to the wire. So good luck with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And really, really appreciating being here and being able to tell, one of those once upon a time stories from a very, 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 very long time ago, so that the next time anybody who's listening has a piece of chocolate or drinks a cup of cacao or is gifted or wants to gift chocolate, they can understand that, the ancient ancestor of the cacao that they're holding or ingesting once came from this site of Montegrande, the ancestors of the cacao. This is an origin story, and it's an honor to be able to tell it.
Yeah, and are there? We'll put in the show notes links, but if you could tell people how they might find out more information, is there a website you could quote us?
For sure, yeah, we do. We are associated with a couple of different foundations, and so we will put those in the links. I can also provide a link to a 3 or 4 minute clip that's part of a larger documentary that was made by PBS and Nova. That speaks about Montegrande, and we do have an Instagram page as well called Huaca Montegrande. Much of it is in Spanish, but we are starting to translate that into English as well, so that more of our world population can learn more about us.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you for coming on Eco Justice Radio, and best of luck with your travels. And be safe, and we're really interested to see how this continues to develop.
Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you for this opportunity. Have a beautiful day.
You too. Thank you to our guest, Karen Gordon. Thank you to Oscar Jimenez Fernandez for the musical interludes. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been Ancient Roots of Cacao, Montegrande archaeological site in Peru. For an extended version of this interview, become a member of our Patreon or visit our website at ecojusticeradio.org. Please connect with us on social media at Ecojustice Radio, SoCal350, and Wilder Utopia. If you like what you've heard and you want others to be informed, subscribe, share the episodes, and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon or making a tax-deductible donation to the show. Project of SoCal 350. The show can be found on KPFK, KPFT, all major podcast apps, and at ecojusticeradio.org. Executive producer and host, myself, Jack Eidt. Co-host, Carrie Kim, and engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.